Welcome to everyone who is with us today. Hello. We continue our series of broadcasts with the heads of our marketing offices operating in the regions where the UST group of companies is present. Today, we are speaking with Oleg Zaretskiy, who heads the company Discovery, working in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and engaged in implementing projects using string transportation in the Middle Eastern region, the African region, and the Pacific region. Oleg, hello. Hello. Glad to welcome you. Today, we are speaking in a rather unusual and unstable situation. We know that in the Persian Gulf region, active military actions are currently taking place. Missiles are exploding, drones are exploding, and that is where you are now. And the number of projects that you are supervising are located there. How does this affect the pace of work and in general the prospects for implementing the initiatives that currently exist? Well, of course, I would probably be lying if I said that such an environment contributes to the implementation of infrastructure projects. Rather, such an environment contributes to the destruction of infrastructure. But as a philosophical phenomenon, as the unity and struggle of opposites, it is probably very applicable in this case, because it is clear that if issues such as mutual strikes on infrastructure arise now, if logistics problems arise, even in the Emirates, then there are all the grounds to say that even the governments of the Gulf countries themselves are beginning to evaluate logistics somewhat differently. And the projects that we had, which we discussed with potential clients, I'm almost certain that once everything is over, they will receive a second life. For example, you probably remember that in Sharjah we started with the project of connecting Sharjah and Khor Fakkan. This solution was meant to ensure the supply of Sharjah and Dubai, those emirates located on the side of the Arabian Gulf. From the side of the Gulf of Oman, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz, which is now blocked. When everything was calm, due to the intrigues of major container operators such as Maersk and COSCO, they left the port of Khor Fakkan. I would not say that the port of Khor Fakkan was abandoned or deserted, but container turnover there decreased significantly. And now, in connection with the current situation, it suddenly becomes clear that the supply of the Emirates should not depend on the Strait of Hormuz. And this Etihad railway, how operational it really is still unclear, cannot fully cover this need. This is simply an example of how there will most likely be a return to the idea of building a line from the port of Khor Fakkan to Sharjah, a container line. In addition, of course, this situation has struck the image of Emirates, such as Dubai and Ras Al Khaimah, as tourist attractive destinations. That image has taken a hit. It will have to be compensated by investments in the tourism sector after all these hostilities end and some peace agreements are signed. There are already statements that the state will allocate additional budgets specifically for the development of tourism and for creating attractive tourist projects. And one of our projects is directly related to tourism here in the Emirates. So, on the one hand, of course, war does not contribute to civilian infrastructure projects, but on the other hand, war exposes weak points and gaps that will have to be addressed. And therefore, despite the difficulties that we're experiencing, the day before yesterday, there were strikes on Dubai. I believe that any problem is not only a difficulty, but also a challenge and an opportunity. And of course, we must focus on using those opportunities. Understood. I would agree with you here and would probably add that the orientation towards exporting energy resources, which is very strongly expressed in the economies of the Persian Gulf countries, also shows its weak and vulnerable sides in the context of what's happening. And the alternative is precisely the development of infrastructure projects that we're talking about. Therefore, in this situation of reassessment, they will certainly receive a new impetus. Let us move on to the next part. I suggest we talk about the initiatives that we currently have and which are now being advanced by your efforts, and briefly orient those who are watching us about what is happening in each direction. I would suggest starting with Dubai. We have not spoken about this project for quite a long time. It has been ongoing since 2018, since the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding, since the beginning of the pre-tender and then the tender. And I know that at the end of last year, you had a number of meetings and discussions, and at the beginning of this year, negotiations took place. Please tell us. I think viewers will find it interesting. Well, regarding Dubai, in fact, we have become finalists among the technologies under consideration. The company Sistra, a large French consulting company, conducted a comparative analysis of the technologies that reached the final stage. I will not say which ones are better or worse, but I believe that we have every chance of getting this project. This is also a tourism project. And returning to what I mentioned earlier, tourist projects will probably now receive some priority. We are now waiting for the decision of the Dubai Ministry of Transport regarding this project. The project is supposed to be implemented with budget funds from Dubai, that is, with government financing. It is quite an ambitious project, about 27 kilometers around Dubai Creek. It is like a lagoon within Dubai. There are currently two difficulties. Apart from the fact that there is a war, there is also the issue that Dubai is building a metro line. These are enormous investments. I want to remind you that the cost of the metro is about $180 million per kilometer. That is the officially announced cost. Accordingly, this is a serious burden on the budget. Work is ongoing here in Dubai, but because of the international situation and because they're currently focused on launching the Blue Line metro project, everything is moving a little slower than we would like, although the process is moving forward. I see. And what other projects currently exist within the United Arab Emirates and nearby countries, the countries of the Persian Gulf? Unfortunately, I cannot disclose the name right now, but we have a project in one of the Emirates of the UAE where the project is already supported by the ruler of the Emirate and strongly supported by the Transport Directorate. I think we will announce it soon. This is a concession project, a public-private partnership, and we have investors who are ready to invest in this project. We have support at the Emirate level. Of course, much will depend on environmental impact assessment, as with any infrastructure project, but I believe that if there is direct support from the ruler, these issues can be resolved more quickly. Right now, we are fully focused on it and hope to announce it soon. We also have requests from Abu Dhabi and from other Emirates. But seriously speaking, there are two projects, Dubai and the one we hope to announce soon. In addition, we are now receiving many requests from Saudi Arabia. There is a large government project there, the name of which I also cannot disclose, but I believe there is no real alternative, and that they will eventually come to us. It's a large territorial development, where there will be no cars, a huge territory, with a stadium or concert hall in the center. People need to be transported there and back. If cars are excluded, there is no other solution except string transport. We're trying to achieve some progress there. Although it also takes time. It is state budget financing, which means many approvals. But we're moving forward. We're also currently doing engineering design work for projects in India, so we have already moved on to other regions. Yes, that is also a tourism project, and I will not name it now, but I hope we will announce it soon. We should have announced it much earlier, but there is state financing at the level of one of the Indian states. Wherever there is state financing, unfortunately, everything takes more time. Approvals, pre-tender documentation, and so on. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of time. We even had to move the location of stations because one land plot turned out to be occupied and we were offered another one. All of this drags on for weeks and even months. But the process is moving forward, and I'm sure there will be a happy ending. Thank you. And what is the current situation with the Nepal project? We know that there was a serious force majeure that forced us to reconsider our plans, but nevertheless, the work had started and until recently was progressing quite successfully. Please tell us briefly how things are moving there. Well, the Nepal project is actually an example that everything is moving in the right direction, but it takes time. In Nepal, we effectively signed a contract and started the engineering design stage. But the project was based on private investment, and when the revolution began, work with the investor was suspended. And that is where the delay, unfortunately, came from. Nevertheless, there are positive developments. The situation in Nepal has now stabilized. Parliamentary elections have taken place there. The party and the people who won are progressive and oriented towards introducing innovations, primarily in the field of transport. They know about our string transport. Some of them are the same people who worked with us before the revolution. Since the elections were quite recent, I hope the situation will soon return to normal. In Nepal, there are also government projects, including the possibility of participating in a tender for a feasibility study and then for the construction of a metro line or rail transport in the Kathmandu Valley. And of course, we must return to the city of Biratnagar, where there was a concession project. It is one of the few projects that was commercially very profitable. We calculated the payback. It is indeed very profitable. So we will definitely return to it and continue working on it. There is a large passenger flow there. Technically, the line is feasible. It's a straight line. There are no issues with land acquisition. The project is very promising. In addition to it, there are many other potential projects there. So Nepal is now finally stabilizing, and we will return there and continue working. All the prerequisites for this exist. Thank you. Next on the map is Taiwan. How are things there? In Taiwan, things are also moving forward, but they take time. 2 public hearings have already taken place so far. At both hearings, we successfully defended the project and received approval. We expect the engineering design contract to be signed at the end of March or in April. Let's hope. Everything is going according to plan. The only thing is that it takes a lot of time because of the environmental impact assessment. The project area is in a national natural park. In the Emirates project, there is also a nuance. It is located in a natural reserve area, and environmental approval must be obtained. By the way, speaking about string transportation, our technology interferes with nature the least. It is the least, what's the word for it? Invasive for the environment. It is the least invasive for the environment. Yes, we do not need to cut down trees, clear large corridors, carry out massive earthworks, relocate utilities, or build huge bridge structures or overpass structures. Therefore, our technology is very adaptable for national parks, reserve areas, and natural reserves. Very, very adaptable. Thank you, Oleg. I will simply list the regions where you have already started active work. Cambodia, El Salvador, Malaysia, and even Honduras. Countries where the company Discovery has begun operating actively. If we summarize, in the near future, we expect the announcement of a project in the UAE, the Emirates, and hope that it will move faster than the Dubai project. The Dubai project is still in progress. Then India and Nepal, where the situation is gradually stabilizing. The new government is adapting both to the global situation and to the domestic political situation. And Taiwan. We also expect an announcement there in the near future. But all of these are relatively small projects. I would like to expand the scale a little. We know and constantly say that Unitsky String Technologies Incorporated and the UST group of companies are moving to the stage of scaling. The first projects are already underway. The first contracts have been signed, now the task is scaling. There are two vectors here, small projects and the logic of large infrastructure and logistics corridors that Anatoly Yunitsky has spoken about. These are overarching projects where there is not only transport but also power engineering, residential infrastructure, industry, agriculture, comprehensive territorial development. If we talk about your region, what large transport access could you identify as promising? Besides the Vietnamese axis that Anatoly Yunitsky has already mentioned, the Hanoi-Ho Chi Minh route and the development of territories along that route, can you highlight anything else? Let me modestly remind you that I'm the author of the scientific article I presented at the last conference. It is called the Trans-African Cross-Border Corridor of Accelerated Development, TRAFCOR. This is precisely a cross-border corridor. And, of course, when we talk about such infrastructure and transport corridors, Africa comes to mind first of all, for many reasons. One could talk for a long time here, starting from the colonial past. But in fact, the main problem of African countries today, which not only slows development, but in my opinion, has largely stopped Africa's development, is logistics. Africa is actually the continent of the future. It has everything: enormous human resources, huge reserves of raw materials and natural wealth, and enormous potential for agriculture. It really is the continent of the future. But despite all that, the continent continues to languish in poverty, disease, wars, and other hardships. And the main reason that it has essentially halted Africa's development is logistics. Countries that are landlocked and have no access to the sea are effectively cut off from civilization. And giving such countries a chance is therefore extremely important, as I say in my scientific article. That is exactly what my scientific article is about, connecting Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali through the port of Dakar is Senegal. These are extremely underdeveloped countries, extremely poor countries, probably among the poorest not only in Africa but in the world. And yet they literally sit on enormous deposits of gold, diamonds, uranium, and other resources, but they cannot export these goods normally because there are no logistical transport routes. I want to say that at the moment in Africa, for example, there is not a single railway longer than about 140 kilometers. That shows the level of infrastructure development. I can give you an example from my own experience. At my previous job, we once shipped 3 containers from Dubai to Chad. Those containers traveled from the port of Lagos in Nigeria to N'Djamena in Chad. That is not such a huge distance, yet it took 4 months for them to arrive, and the delivery of each container cost about $12,000 to $14,000 back in 2014. You can imagine how the cost of building materials in such circumstances affects the cost of construction and the overall standard of living. I will say even more. In Madagascar, in Antananarivo, the price of building materials is practically the same as in Dubai, while salaries are completely incomparable. People live in huts and cannot afford almost anything, simply because everything that is imported is insanely expensive. As a result, they cannot build anything, and there is essentially no investment there. This spiral of hardship continues to tighten. The only way to break it is to give access to the sea to countries located in the center of the continent, or countries that have no sea access. And here a question arises. Am I the only one clever here? I'm sure this idea has occurred to many people, but for some reason no one has managed to implement it successfully. Ethiopia tried to connect Addis Ababa with Djibouti. Ethiopia is also effectively landlocked now. There have been attempts. Mali also tried to connect its capital with Dakar. But in the end, those railways hardly work. Why? Because the local population is completely ignored. When we talk about vandalism on railways in Africa being the main transport problem, we also must understand why it happens. Everything that you build is literally dismantled and stolen almost immediately. Remember how in the film Lord of War, the Antonov aircraft was stripped apart? The same thing happens with railways. It is impossible to guard them, because you would need so many guards that that project would immediately cease to be commercially viable. And many people blame the local population for this. But that is wrong. Put yourself in the place of those people. They have no jobs, they live in absolute poverty. Essentially, they have nothing to lose. And suddenly, a railway is built on their land, transporting ore, gold, uranium from one place to another without paying any attention to the people who live there. In that situation, you do not need to be a Marxist or an anarchist to start robbing passing trains or destroying the railway, because the local population receives nothing from it. Well, at best, some officials benefit from it. That is why this attitude towards transport infrastructure arises. Local people and tribes see it as an invasion of their territory, as extraction of resources and exploitation of their land. That's it. That's the reason. And the only way to solve this problem is to propose a different solution, an infrastructure and transport corridor, when the logistics route is not just a railway with someone else's trains passing through, but part of a comprehensive territorial development system that allows the local population to live normally. When settlements are built along the corridor, when innovative agriculture develops there, when industry develops, this is a logical process. If logistical connections to seaports appear, industry and agriculture begin to develop naturally. Then the population of those countries becomes involved in the infrastructure and transport corridor. They no longer perceive it as something foreign or as an invasion, but as part of their own lives. People become participants in the process, and I'm absolutely convinced that for regions such as Africa and perhaps also South America, this approach is the only correct path for solving the development problem for the African continent. And the Trans-African Cross-Border Corridor that I proposed in my scientific article can go further from Niger through Chad to Sudan, and then to the Red Sea. In that case, it will become not just a cross-border corridor, but a transcontinental corridor. This would allow goods to be transported from the Red Sea, essentially from the Middle East, to the Atlantic coast of Africa, bypassing the need to go around the entire continent. This solution would affect not only commercial projects, it could also change the fate of an entire continent that is currently in an extremely difficult situation. Look at these countries, Sudan, Chad. It is complete poverty. Yet given their natural wealth and resources, they could live completely different lives. So, when we talk about such infrastructure and logistics corridors, Evgeny, you have actually touched on a very sensitive topic for me. Well, of course, I understand. In fact, there is enormous potential here. You said that Africa is the continent of the future. If we talk about transport and infrastructure corridors, Africa's climate allows construction, and housing can be quite affordable. We know that because agriculture there was conducted for centuries without a scientific approach, despite initially very rich soils, they are now heavily depleted and degraded. Therefore, crop yields have fallen. What Anatoly Yunitsky proposes with the Utera product, for example, is precisely restorative agriculture. That is what Africa needs. Energy problems in Africa can also be solved. There are colossal reserves of brown coal there, and the UST transport overpass can also serve as a power transmission line. We can integrate one with the other. And the water pipeline, yes. Thank you, Oleg. Today we had an interesting cultural, philosophical, historical conversation. It reminded me of the first civilizations that arose along the banks of the Tigris and the Euphrates in Mesopotamia. And you're speaking about the civilization of the future, the continent of the future. And we see that most likely this future will also arise along lines of communication. Only in this case, it will be a line of string transportation. The road to the future runs through a literal road. But there is another interesting point. I understand we're already approaching the end, but still, you began developing this project. We also participated in this work at Yunitsky String Technologies Incorporated in Minsk. Last year, a fairly large report was prepared, essentially a preliminary feasibility study. Then you wrote the report that you mentioned and presented it at a conference and at several international forums, including under the auspices of the UN and UNESCO. Is there any response today? Is there interest from African countries? You know, there is a response. For example, a whole delegation of from Senegal visited us in Sharjah. These were city mayors. I will not directly connect their visit with our initiative. It might have been a coincidence, or perhaps it haven't been. But in any case, the mayors from Senegal came and looked at our transport system. They were very inspired by these ideas. Some of them promised to bring these ideas to a higher level, because, of course, this requires joint efforts. Creating such an infrastructure and transport corridor requires coordination between several countries. And in our case, it means at least 4 countries and 4 governments. The situation is somewhat eased by the fact that 3 of these countries have now united in the so-called Alliance of Sahel States. It also helps that this territory is now being actively developed by Russia. Therefore, we should think about promoting this idea not only at the level of African countries, but at the highest level, but also through large agencies. For example, it could be discussed with Rosatom, which is interested in developing uranium deposits and is already active in the region. We have U-Trans solutions for transporting ore over long distances. It is clear that Africa simply does not have money right now. Everything that could be extracted from there has essentially been extracted. In many places, people are literally starving, so expecting local governments to pull money from their budgets and invest in such projects is difficult. It is also difficult to expect investments from Western countries, because you probably know the French were essentially expelled from Niger. Now, this is a region where Russia and China are actively present. Therefore, investments from Russia or China into the development of such an infrastructure and transport corridor could become one of the key directions. Of course, this does not mean that work on the ground should stop. We continue it, but we need to combine efforts. Yes, we are already starting such work, and it seems to me that this is indeed the correct strategy. Not trying to find money within a poor region, but approaching it comprehensively through large corporations and the alignment of their interests. Some are interested, for example, in raw materials, some in energy, some in the real estate market, some in industrial development. Linking all these interests together is precisely the large task that has already begun. I'm sure it can succeed, and it can be done quite quickly, especially because our technology provides very substantial savings compared to other options. Yes, creating such infrastructure development corporations is probably the right path now. Inviting potential partners into the corporation and then entering specific territories with ready solutions and possibly financial partners. By the way, they are ready to finance projects. Several large financial companies have approached me. One of them is based in Panama, an international giant. They said, if there are projects, let us consider them. We are ready to finance infrastructure. Of course, these projects must be commercially attractive. They will not finance territorial development purely out of humanitarian considerations. But large infrastructure projects related to transporting raw materials ore and other key resources, raw materials, that pay back quickly can indeed attract investment. So we understand what we will do in this sector of small, fast, payback, technological projects. We understand the horizons. Africa is one example. There are others. For example, Vietnam. If we compare the cost of implementing the Hanoi-Ho Chi Minh infrastructure corridor with the railway solutions currently being discussed, the savings for the country could reach about $50 billion simply by using a different technology. And naturally, in the case of Africa, where real money is a major problem, such savings could become a decisive factor. I'm sure that it will be so. Thank you, Oleg. I am very grateful to you for our today's conversation. I hope those of you who watched us found it interesting and will continue holding such meetings and telling you about the progress of projects implementing string transportation systems and now also related technologies across different countries and continents. Thank you very much for your attention. Until next time, goodbye.